Good morning. Assalamu alaikum. Peace be with you all. My name is Anwar Ahmed Khan. I'm coming to you from Northern Virginia, and I work in Alexandria, which is just outside of Washington, D.C. I'm the president and co-founder of Islamic Relief USA, and I have been involved as a staff member of Islamic Relief since 1993. And I started as a volunteer in high school in Britain in 1989. And I'm very honored to be here today with my colleague Jihad Saleh from Islamic Relief. And we are both here because our dear friend, mentor, teacher, Reverend Beckman asked us to come. And it is nearly impossible for us to say no to him. He's very kind and generous with his advice and his time. And people talk about interfaith work, but I think it's really about relationships. So we have that trust with Reverend Beckman, and he encouraged us to do what we could against poverty, against hunger, through advocacy, on top of the work that we were doing. So the class today is about poverty, God, and politics. So that's a lot of stuff. I'm going to try to do what I can in the remaining 8.5 minutes. So first of all, what is the organization I represent? Its name is Islamic Relief USA. Islamic because we are inspired by our faith, but we have people of all faith and no faith that work with us and that we help around the world. Our name is Relief because we started doing relief work. Our relief work started as a result of the crisis in Tigray in Ethiopia in 1984, when the famine forced many of them to flee and to go into Sudan. Some of our medical students from the Islamic Society of the University of Birmingham were visiting for a conference. They saw the refugees and felt that more had to be done. So as you may know, Tigray in Ethiopia is majority Christian. So the actual crisis that started Islamic Relief worldwide was the Christians in Ethiopia and Muslims, but majority Christians, and trying to help them in Sudan, which is a Muslim majority country. And it started from the University of Birmingham in England. So from the beginning, we were involved in relief. We're also now doing development. We are very proud to be from the USA, that's in our name. And we work here, and we have, through our partners, work in 40 countries around the world. But overall, we've worked in about 80 countries since our inception. And we started here in America in 1993, and Islamic Relief Worldwide started in the United Kingdom in 1984. The Islamic Relief, like many Islamic organizations, it depends which country we're in, and we're slightly different in each country. Here in America, we don't have one ethnic group, which is the majority of Muslims. The largest ethnic group is African Americans, but we have African Americans, Middle Eastern North Africans, that's the second group, South Asians, the third group, and everybody else is the fourth group. So there's no one group which is the majority of Muslims in America. So sometimes when people look at me, and especially with DEI right now, people are trying to guess what ethnicity I am, and they put down Arab. I'm not Arab, I'm actually Asian. I was born in Pakistan, which is in Asia. I grew up in UK, United Kingdom, which is in Europe, and I live in America now. The reason I was inspired to spend most of my life urging the feeding of the needy is because I believe the Quran told me so. It says in the Quran, Surah Al-Ma'un, neighborly needs, verses 1-3, have you seen those that reject of the faith? It's those that reject of the orphan and urgeth not the feeding of the needy. It is not our job as Muslims to feed the needy. It's much more than that. It's to urge the feeding of the needy. It's not our job to feed the people in our community or of our faith or who look like us. It's our job to urge the feeding of the needy of everyone, everywhere. There are no conditions in this. So this is from the Quran. From the Hadith, which is the saying and actions of the Prophet Muhammad, we're told that one does not have faith if one's neighbor is hungry. So it is a matter of faith for us to feed the needy. It is a test of our faith if we urge the feeding of the needy. So we started with raising awareness and raising money. Then we went to doing the mission, because no money, no mission. But then you have to do the mission, because no mission, no mission. Then we moved into witness. And my colleague, Jihad, will talk more about that. And when he came into the organization, we really stepped up what we were doing about witness. So we started with trying to raise funds, then trying to make sure that the needy people got what they needed. But then we were pushing the witness. And this was actually, all of these things were encouraged from our theology to do. We use an Islamic framework called Maqasid, which is part of Sharia, which is Islamic law. And at the center of that is human dignity. And the framework is around faith, life, intellect, wealth, and posterity, future generations. So it is important for us, not just that we are here to feed the needy, but it has to be done in a dignified manner. We are more and more trying to do projects to do with solidarity, not just a paternal view of, hey, let me write a check and you do what I tell you to do. That's not the way it's meant to be done. So I remember in the 80s, that's the way it used to be. We went from donor-driven to needs-based, which is what we thought the need was on the ground, to now we use the framework of rights-based. That's here in America and that's overseas. So we don't impose what we want on the people of how to fix their problems. We ask them, how are we going to fix this? Within Islam, we believe that God is sovereign. So we don't believe it is the state that gives rights to individuals. We believe it is God, and it is our God-given right to have certain freedoms. There are many freedoms that we have, and one of our freedom is the freedom to not be in fear of poverty. So we have more and more been using the anti-poverty language, and more we've been trying to center our voices on what we think are the causes of poverty in this country. And one cannot talk about poverty in this country without looking at racism. And we've had a deep look at that in the past year and a half since the marches started over George Floyd. We were looking at it before, but it's very concentrated. So here in America, we spend about $10 million in America. And overall Islamic Relief budget last year was $110 million. And the budget of Islamic Relief USA came from 110,000, mostly private donors. It's not from institutions, hardly anything comes from foundations. It comes from individuals. And individuals from mostly the Muslim community rose up last year during COVID to help us to raise over $110 million. So America is normally, for the past few years, it's been within the top 3 countries where we distribute aid. So majority of our money goes overseas, but one of the countries we give more is here in America. We see that because there's poverty here in America, we cannot ignore it here. So we've worked with different government departments, and Jihad will talk more about that. But we've been trying to explain to our community how we work. So there's about 240 partners here in America. 80% of them are Muslim run. 20% are from other faith or no faith. And that includes, by the way, white evangelical Christians are our partners. We're working with them. And of course, African-American congregations and other areas we're working with across the country geographically, and with Jewish group, Muslim groups, Jewish group, Christians, and others. But out of the 240, about 35% are African-American led, 33% are women led. So through our network, we're trying to work with them to go for the root case of poverty. We listened to them, and they told us that it's great that you're giving us food, but we need capacity building and other projects as well. So Jay will go into that into more detail. So as I said, we started here to raise money. Then we were doing mission, which included feeding the needy, and Reverend Beckman really encouraged us not just to feed the needy, but to do a witness of feeding the needy. And I think that's a perfect way of setting up my dear brother Jihad to talk about the witness that we've done.
Thank you so much, Reverend Beckman, for this opportunity to share with your colleagues in this course. And it's a pleasure to meet all of you. I'm Jihad Saleh Williams. I'm the Senior Advisor for Advocacy and Government Affairs at Islamic Relief USA at our Government Affairs office in Washington, D.C. I actually reside in Washington, D.C., just barely a mile north of the Capitol, if many people are familiar with D.C., near Union Station. Just for a little background, I am originally from Los Angeles, born and raised in South Central LA. My first interaction with Islamic Relief, and with Anwar in particular, the group of the first three folks who came from the UK to help set up the day-to-day operations, which included Anwar. I remember meeting Anwar when I was a young student at UCLA in the early 90s, when the organization was first established. For some reason, which I didn't understand at that time, they were recruiting and outreaching to students for support, primarily UCLA, USC, and a few other campuses. And I just remember even back then thinking, it's like, why are they coming to students when they're asking for money or they need money for their programs? And we don't have any money. But what it was, and what I understand now, looking back over it, and the wisdom of those three founders, Anwar, Jahangir, and Shaheen, is that what they were looking for were people who were committed to the mission of the Islamic Relief, regardless if they had the monetary value to provide at that moment. Because ultimately, the success of Islamic Relief, and this is across the board, any civil society organization, social movement, and so forth, is the connection to the commitment and the drive to desire to find ways to help others, regardless if they have dollars. So ultimately that leads to volunteering. And Islamic Relief, the strength of Islamic Relief, with God's permission and support, has always been the support of our hundreds of thousands of supporters, increasingly not just donors, but volunteers, and particularly, line from my work, advocates. So just real quick, and just after I left UCLA for several years, I was a teacher, pursued some graduate school work for several years, and then came to DC, and I worked in Congress for 4 years as a legislative assistant for maybe any of those from New York City. I worked for Congressman Gregory Meeks, who's the congressman from Jamaica, Queens area. When you fly into JFK, that's his district. But it was during that time in the mid-2000s when, during my time working in Congress, at a reception I was hosting in Congress that aligned with the Muslim American community, bringing folks onto the Hill, I saw Anwar. I think I had not seen Anwar probably in a good 11 years, 10 to 11 years, when I saw him around 2008 or 9, it was. And I remember just saying, Anwar's like, hey, what are you doing in DC? And I was like, what are you doing in DC? I'm like, I'm working in Congress. And also I told him I was running the Congressional Muslim Staff Association on the side and helping Muslim organizations engage their members of Congress. But Anwar said that Islamic Relief had set up a government affairs office, or set up an office in DC. And in my mind, where I was always constantly thinking with the Muslim Staff Association, not in my formal work for Congressman Meeks, but how to raise important kitchen table issues, social issues that Muslim Americans are concerned about, face, and so forth, to kind of raise awareness to congressional members about who Muslims are and their diversity and their concerns against, what you can imagine, unfortunately, which still continues the few ways that media and government talk about Muslims, national security, terrorism, and so forth. Need to go into that. But my thing was, Muslim Americans are like any other American community. They're concerned about good schools for their children, safe communities, good health care so they don't go broke if they get sick, fair paying jobs, retirement plans, so forth. So right away, I saw that Islamic Relief, because of my knowledge of the organization that I supported, that this was the organization that needed to be on Capitol Hill, engaging members of Congress, talking about the anti-poverty work, anti-hunger work that it was doing in the United States and abroad. And that ultimately led to a little dance for about 1.5 years where I kept telling them they should be on Capitol Hill lobbying and advocating. And they kept saying to me, Jihad, why don't you come do the work for us? And that was in 2010, right before, if you may remember, the Democrats lost the House and that historic big loss, and the Republicans took over. And I didn't want to be in a minority office at that time. I thought my 4 years was good enough service in Capitol. I got to know how that worked. And so I decided to leave Congress, and Islamic Relief provided me a great opportunity to make that transition to where I could focus on the Muslim community full time on its government and particularly congressional engagement, as I said, on kitchen table issues of poverty, hunger, homelessness, and so forth. So that's what our public affairs department does. Our public affairs department, which is still relatively one of the newest and smallest departments in Islamic Relief, and we are the advocacy wing. We do the work of advocating on policy and legislation and budgets in Congress. And we, at this point in time, we primarily do it at the federal level. We don't have the capacity to do state and a local level, but engage in Congress, the executive departments. We control our messaging to media, both traditional print media, social media, but we also do other things such as engaging embassies, multilateral organizations such as the UN, because so much of our work is international. That's what our responsibility is to promote policy, to promote partnership, and I'll talk a little bit about that in our advocacy work, and promoting the good work that Islamic Relief does. Again, the Muslim American community does so much work domestically and international for the good, just to say for the good, that ultimately it's not recognized, and so much of that's done is actually in collaboration and partnership with other faith and communities of conscience. So what we do in our program is I'm going to share my video, but I'm showing just right now a flyer that we share. Is like a background, our advocacy priorities. And that is me, if you can see from your distance, but later on, check out the video. That is myself, Christina Tobias Nahi at the top. That's our department director. And next to her is Jared Markland, who's also, like me, a advocate. I do primarily domestic focused advocacy. Jared does our international work. We've become now where 5-6 years ago, it was actually just me for several years, doing both domestic and international and embassies and Congress. Ultimately, that means I wasn't doing any of it well because it's just too much to cover. Now we have a bigger team, and we have other folks in our communications section of our office and so forth. But that's me, Christina, and Jared are core of our government engagement aspect of our public affairs. So what does advocacy mean to Islamic Relief? And I'm not sure if Anwar went over our mission. Where Islamic Relief, our standard mission is IRUSA provides relief and development in a dignified manner, regardless of gender, race, or religion, and works to empower individuals in their communities and give them a voice in the world. That's our general mission. And Anwar did speak about the issue of dignity and so forth. But in particularly, when it comes to public affairs, when it comes to advocacy, when it comes to government engagement, our focus, our mission, or you could say our department mission is, at Islamic Relief USA, advocacy means working together to amplify the voices and concerns of the communities we serve, here in the US and abroad. Through our advocacy and lobbying efforts, focus on lobbying, we strive to build the public and political will to end poverty, hunger, and suffering in the United States and around the world. And our legislative priorities align with the following 4 United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. And I think this is important that Islamic Relief USA and our international partner, Islamic Relief Worldwide, we do align with these international standards and participated in the dialogue that led up to these Sustainable Development Goals. And very much Reverend Beckman I remember being at meetings when the UN hosted events in DC with stakeholders and civil society organizations to help develop these goals prior to 2015. But our 4 core areas, when myself or Jared, when we're lobbying or when we're engaging certain executive departments, what drives, all the 1,001 things we could advocate on, how do we narrow it down within our humanitarian mission? We focus on these 4 core areas that align with the SDGs. No poverty, zero hunger, gender equity, and particularly women's empowerment and protection, and climate action or climate change, creation care, however you want to define it. And there is a 5th one, which is not represented in a SDG because it kind of cuts across many of them, but which is important to our advocacy, is focus on prioritizing advocacy for refugees and internally displaced populations. So I just wanted to give that, how do we define, advocacy is, primary focusing on what are the concerns of communities we serve, amplifying their voices, and building that public and political will. And we no doubt get that language very much from our partners at the Alliance in Hunger, which Reverend Beckman was the chair of, in helping develop that language. It's not just about political power development, but also developing the community will, the public will. When I came to Islamic Relief, fair to say we lack capacity for what our ambitions were to be a leading voice in Washington, D.C., particularly a Muslim voice on key issues that aligned with our values and mission, which I just outlined. In that, one of the most important moves that we made that helped us grow, understand what we could do, what was possible in developing the language as a newbie to the network, was joining coalitions. And I'll say particularly of the 2 or 3 first ones, the Alliance to End Hunger was pivotal in our connecting with other partner organizations, gaining that language, as I just kind of referenced that we've taken language and included to ours that we see modeled in the Alliance's mission. I'm not sure if Reverend Beckman has shared that. But it also put us in contact on a very intimate individual level, like individuals like Reverend David Beckman, where we shared the mission of ending poverty and hunger, but in particularly from a faith idiom, as we're thinking about how do we speak about this to secular audiences, communities of faith on Capitol Hill, particularly people who are not Muslim, we found that how organizations like Bread for the World, or the Friends Committee, or the Salvation Army, being in meetings with them, we were able to see how they discuss their issue from a utilitarian or a human rights perspective, but also at the core from their faith traditions. And being Abrahamic faith, often we were able to pull from that language because it was very much shared language around certain stories and notions of justice that we shared within the greater Abrahamic tradition. So in that, there was the point of also mentoring that we received from individuals like Reverend Beckman on a very individual level, spending time, speaking with, learning from, as Anwar and myself engaged with our peers in these organizations, but also looking at the resources that they used. So very much in the first 3 to 4 years of our work, our coalitions helped us get meetings, take meetings with members of Congress, to bring not just just a Christian and Jewish voice often in some of our in those meetings, but also now truly making it beyond ecumenical, but interfaith, adding the Muslim voice. And I have stories of walking into Senator Ben Carter's office and he says, "Oh, wow, like Christian and Muslim and Jew here to lobby about hunger." Sounds like a bad joke starting up. But it's an interesting case. But it's clear that what we saw was members of Congress, government officials were clearly comfortable and knew and assumed the engagement from Christian and Jewish organizations, but clearly had never thought about the Muslim community advocating, particularly on domestic poverty issues, was a huge sea change in how they understood the Muslim community because of the work of Islamic Relief. The last 2 ways that advocating is expanded is Islamic Relief as a organization domestically. We grant over 250 organizations in over 35 states. And if I remember correct, over 80 congressional districts. Many of them, the majority of them, are Muslim-founded organizations, but increasingly, we are also granting Christian, Jewish, and secular organizations. Ultimately, these are the communities that are in districts, in states, saving lives, improving lives, and building bridges between communities and understanding. These are the folks that truly, as they're helping improve the quality of life of individuals, should be engaging with members of Congress. I knew that it would strengthen our hand when we met in lobby meetings or government affairs engagement meetings to include these individuals, the executive directors, the program directors, as a form of grass tops advocacy, not grassroots advocacy at this point in time from Islamic Relief, but working that we bring in our partners to highlight the work that they were doing, but also we greatly appreciate it when you mentioned to a member of Congress how we were funding them and how that helped expand their impact, but also training them. And often, I would say, particularly in the 90% of the Muslim organizations that we fund, and that overall universe of organizations we fund, the vast majority have never met with their public officials to advocate on poverty and hunger. So training them on how to take a meeting with their member of Congress or any public official and advocating on core legislation around poverty, hunger, and homelessness that align with the needs that would improve the quality of life of the communities that they serve. That's what we've been doing over the past 4 years. And that's where another level of engagement. And I think where we've been able to now to take meetings with over senators, representatives from over 20 states over the past 2 years, We've built that name because also it allows Islamic Relief to be associated as an organization based in DC. We don't have a brick and mortar presence in the majority of these places, to see that how Islamic Relief is helping those individuals in their communities in need, but also being a leading voice on actual legislation. And last, where we want to go into the future and where we're focusing now, our next goal is to become similar to like groups like Bread for the World. As I mentioned before, the strength of Islamic Relief has always been in our supporters. Our network of over 300,000 people we have in our system, and about a third of them, about 100 to 150,000 of them annually give. But these people, these who are consistent, who are supporters of Islamic Relief, primarily as donors, how do we now give them an opportunity, if they want to opt in, to learn about an issue, register with Islamic Relief Advocacy? We provide them resources and tools. And when need be, how do we mobilize them in their states, their districts, through using online tools and advocacy, click advocacy that many of you may be familiar with, but to mobilize them as constituents, as advocates, as people of faith to engage with the members of Congress. That is the real power, the next move for Islamic Relief. And again, donations, volunteerism, and advocacy. So I think that is where we are looking now, and we've added someone to our team who's focusing on advocacy campaigns with 3 to 5 year horizons and thinking of resources and tools of how to really provide college students, mosque groups, church groups who want to advocate. And Islamic Relief and our platform will be a primary means or tools for them to do that. That is the vision that we have now for Islamic Relief, taking to the next level. And again, that is very much, we learn from and look at and try to model quite often what we see generated by organizations like Bread for the World or MAZON, which is the Jewish Voice for Hunger, core partners in our advocacy space. So I want to leave it there. I'm sure there's maybe questions. I'm happy to speak more about, how we engage. And I focus primarily in Congress, but we do also engage the executive departments, Department of Agriculture, Health and Human Services, primarily domestically, and State Department and USAID internationally, and helping many of those organizations connect that we fund with individuals in those departments to hear how our government-funded programs that executive departments implement, what does that look like on the ground? How can they be improved? Where are the gaps? And there's no better way to hear or know how things can be improved from actual organizations, many of them who may be receiving U.S. government funding or are thinking about it and how to implement that in local communities and how we're creating space for that to happen, particularly with Muslim American founded organizations focused on hunger, poverty, homelessness, climate change, and refugee resettlement.